go to our next guest, the one and only Mark Frost. What's going on, my man? How you doing, Mark?
Greetings. It's cold here in Georgia.
It is freezing here also. I
It's
was
like
out there
20
yesterday.
degrees. I know probably to you that's like nothing, but it was cold. It's below freezing here.
Look, I'll tell you this. It was like it felt like it was gonna snow. Like it was that bad, like bone chillingly cold. So man, I thank you for joining me. Economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian. I can't believe I know that by heart at this point. No, it's great to have you, man. You mentioned about Donald Trump, and I saw when he did this, and I didn't necessarily do a show on it, so I thought it'd be great to talk about it. Donald Trump threatened BRICS countries. Now, this is fascinating on so many levels, because in one sense, the Democratic Party never even acknowledged that BRICS exists. Like I've never heard them even whisper the word. Maybe they whisper it, in mumble tones to one another in meetings or whatever. But they never really said anything about it. I remember on the campaign trail, Donald Trump mentioned sanctions, and he talked about how sanctions were damaging the dollar and saying basically, yeah, we need to get rid of sanctions on Russia because it's damaging our relationship and damaging the dollar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which is one of the first few times that I heard somebody actually mention, hey, this isn't helping us. This is actually hurting us. Then I heard him mention, I think he wrote a post about it or something like that, effectively saying he's going to sanction the countries that try to de-dollarize. So it's like, use my product or else. Who the hell does that? How do you force somebody to use your dollar? And if you need to do that, haven't you missed the thread? And so he seems to be functioning from this kind of hubristic belief that America is in position to even do this, which I don't buy the premise that America is in a position to do. I would go further. The very act that we've used sanctions and everything else, Donald Trump was right the first time around, has caused these countries to do exactly what they're doing in trying to find a way to mitigate the dollar as a weapon and as a potential to damage their economies and their countries in the way that we use them. Give me your take on this. This is going to speed de-dollarization, not slow it down. Or do you disagree with that?
No, I absolutely agree with it. And the sad thing about the whole thing, maybe the word isn't even sad. Maybe the word is silly. The silly thing about the entire BRICS concept is the concept of BRICS is silly. You have this so-called collection of nations that don't necessarily like each other, China, India, but they're united in one big giant international sort of annoyance, which basically is that, okay, we can't keep using the US dollar as a reserve currency if they're going to stop it from being a medium of exchange around the world.
Exactly.
You can't have you can't have all the three-letter agencies waging war using the dollar. So you have the Drug Enforcement Agency that's, wanting to stop, international movement of dollars. And then you have the Ukraine thing. And then you have every time something happens, it seems like now the new warfare is let's use the Treasury Department and the Fed and every other agency that we have that has anything to do with US dollars. And let's do everything we can to make the dollar as a unit of account, a medium of exchange when it comes to international commerce. Let's make that less attractive to people that are using it. Right. Because nobody wants the dollar meltdown to happen. I mean, literally no one, not even one person. They don't want it. We don't want it because you had me on a while back where we kind of ran out of time, and I said, so you asked what would happen if the dollar ever lost its
if they lost the reserve currency.
And I said something like it would be akin to a nuclear war in the economic sense. It would be devastating. And I'm one of the few guests that you have that don't want to be contacted. I don't have, I'm not selling any books. I don't have a podcast. I don't, so people have to work to track me down. And, you're a new podcast and you don't have Joe Rogan numbers, but 5 people tracked me down and wanted to know, well, what do you mean by that? So, so maybe it might be worth taking maybe a couple of minutes and I'll just talk.
Yeah, please. I mean,
about,
that's a big
what
issue,
it is,
right?
why it came to be and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the U.S., since Bretton Woods, which was the foundational monetary New World Order after World War II, because people forget that right after World War II, I mean, very few places on the earth were untouched by that, and virtually no industrialized country, except maybe Switzerland and a handful of others. But if you basically, if you wanted to buy a washing machine, you probably had to buy it from an American company. If you wanted to buy a car, so General Motors exported its crappy cars all over the world, and things like that, and it produced a level of hubris. And the Bretton Woods treaty basically started the IMF. It set the U.S. dollar as the new gold standard for international commerce between nations. And so the balance of payments, as economists call it, where each nation has its gold supply at the New York Fed, debited and credited and all that kind of stuff, based upon whether it's able to repay its debt obligations and all that sort of a thing. So everybody was happy. Even people that hated us used the dollar because it was the best choice that you had at that time to make international payments, because volatility creates havoc in international exchange. Just kind of think about it. Let's say you are a German company and you're manufacturing something with a 20% margin, and then the euro tanks by 20%. Well, everything you've produced for free. And if it tanks more, then you've actually produced it at a loss, even though you haven't done anything wrong. Your productivity's still high, all of that stuff. It's just the nature of that. And so Bretton Woods stabilized the international monetary system. And for the vast majority of the time, presidents understood you don't mess with the secret sauce. We might hate this country, but we're not going to toxify US dollars, because 70% of the demand for them is outside of American commerce. There's more dollars outside the United States than there are inside. And if let's just say we woke up tomorrow morning and the BRICS conspiracy, if you will, took place, and no international contracts anymore are denominated in dollars, and so the demand for dollars plummets by 70%. That would set off a wave of not just inflation, but hyperinflation. It would start in the United States, and as the saying goes, if the United States sneezes, the world catches a cold, and it would literally decimate every economic market, every financial market. Investment capital would dry up, and you would have a situation that's not that dissimilar from, say, what happened to the dollarization after the Brazil currency just imploded. That's a great monetary example. We monetary economists have studied that ad nauseum. How can you go from having a relatively stable currency to, within just a couple years, it's cheaper to use $1 billion Zimbabwe note as toilet paper than to buy toilet paper? That's the nightmare. Because if the world stops buying dollars, that means they literally also have stopped buying U.S. Treasury bonds. If they stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds, then for the U.S. to service its debt, which is now, I believe, it just hit the number 3. I believe it's number 3 on the budget right now. It was 4, and it's probably going to be number 2 by the end of next year, which means that if we have to lower the price of our bonds to get people to buy them, well, there's an inverse relationship between the yield of a bond and the price you pay for it. So if the Treasury Department has to lower its price to sell because they have a bunch of bonds on the shelf and they have to fund the government, then they have to lower the price. If you lower the price, you increase interest rates. You increase the net interest rate that the United States pays. And if 70% of the demand for dollars dries up, what you're going to end up having is is a nightmare situation where dollars themselves have just plummeted. The Treasury Department is forced to pay ridiculous, probably double, triple digit interest rates if this happened. And so let's just say it goes up to 100%. Well, what we do know from monetary history is once a nation starts down this road, they never, and when I say never, I mean they never recover. They keep printing money because they get addicted to it.
Yeah.
If people stop buying our bonds, we have to lower that price, which increases our net rate of, it increases the yield from the perspective of an investor, but it increases our interest expense. So now interest becomes the number one thing on the budget. And so that starts crowding out investment. It starts crowding out people's 401ks. And what you have is a top-heavy system that just starts to implode on itself. And the only way out of it is just to keep printing money until you've evaporated your debt. And now you're in austerity. You're subjugated by the IMF and the nations that are going to come in and try to bail you out. I'm not even sure the United States might be too big to bail out.
Yeah.
And I guess you could argue it's too big to fail. Even China wouldn't want BRICS to happen overnight.
Well, let me ask you
even
this.
though they say they do, they don't, because it would drop the GDP of the entire world precipitously. There's no getting around that.
So just to nail it down, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. The amount of money that we pay on interest right now is nearly the amount that we pay for the military budget. It's about $600 billion. I'm sorry.
I think it actually exceeded
the military
the last fiscal quarter where we measured it. I believe it exceeded military. So I think it's number 3 now.
$1 trillion a year that we're paying just to service the debt.
Exactly.
That
so
is
it's like it. So I bet every listener here, at least, unless they're real young, has had a bad experience in their life. They did something stupid. They started living on credit cards, and they do you get 12 months, 12 months free. And then you read the fine print, you have to pay it retroactively if you go more than 2 months and all. I mean, more than 1 year and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we've done. And we've been able to do it because the dollar is so stable, because no matter what we do, the world keeps the dollar at a stable sort of a thing, rather than just the volatility that most nations' currencies go through. So we get this giant benefit from this post-World War II monetary economic order.
Mm-hmm.
But that comes with responsibility. And the responsibility of that is you have to keep the currency that is the reserve currency as a liquid, transactionable currency. If you start putting every condition on it, if you start penalizing people that hold it, if you seize it just because the government, you can be traveling in an airport with $20,000. You might have every legitimate reason to have cash. When I go overseas, I like to have lots of US cash with me. Mm-hmm. And there's a variety of reasons to have cash. But if customs sees that, you don't have any real due process. They can just take it and say, we think this might be a form of illegal activity. And now you have to sue them to get your money back. And for a lot of people, the money, it costs more to sue them than the money is worth.
Yeah.
So yes, you're exactly right. The problem is if the largest portion of your budget is interest, think of the opportunity cost of that. You're not building roads. You're not educating children. You're not investing in research and development. You're literally paying a debt service. And 40 years ago, that was fine because Americans owed mostly themselves their money. Well, globalization has changed all of that. The vast majority of U.S. debt, the bonds that we've issued, are held by foreign entities. China, Russia, India, governments, central banks hold U.S. Treasury dollars, and of course, private international firms own U.S. investment dollars. And if
just
they
to
just
clarify,
and if that dries up, it's literally it's an apocalyptic nightmare scenario is what it is. I mean, I think it would be better almost if you abstracted away the value of life. There would probably be less damage by a nuclear exchange than there would be in what would happen to the world if this happened.
like a financial
And
meltdown.
China and India and Brazil and South Africa and all these other countries know this. So from their perspective, we're not being responsible. We're like, okay, you're the boss, you're in charge, you're the reserve currency, and that gives a responsibility on you. You are to provide a non-volatile transactional currency that can actually be used, not something that you seize on a whim, not something that you use as a tool of war. Because once you start doing that, people say, you know what? The US dollar used to be a safe haven. It's not so safe anymore. If you say something they don't like, if you do something that is out of line with what they think you ought to be doing, you're going to pay a giant price for it. And you might pay a price that you can't even afford. And so this is the problem.
Well, and just to be clear on that other point, it's one thing if we are making debt in the US dollars. Well, we can pay anything for US dollars, right? The US can print whatever it wants in that case. At the point where you owe China or you owe India or you owe some other country, okay, well, at that point, it's in their currency. Is that right? Like, am I getting that right?
No, it's not. No, all of our debt is in US dollars. And that's what happens. That's why countries go. So countries that are experiencing moderate inflation have two choices. They can tighten their monetary policy and make money more scarce, which will have more unemployment, or they can keep it the same and have the inflation rate basically remain the same, or they can say, you know what, we've gone this far. It's almost like a person that has charged up their credit card. They know they're going to end up having to file bankruptcy sooner or later. And they're like, you know what, let's just have 6 months and have a party. And so that's the problem. So our debt to China is measured in US dollars. It's literally US Treasury bills and bonds that they hold. And that's the problem, because money in one word is debt. It's a liability with respect to the federal government. So if you look at the dollars the Fed has outstanding, that's a liability on the Fed's balance sheet. It's not an asset. And so we've been printing our way into prosperity for a very, very long time. And we've been printing money to do dumb things. So for instance, a great example is, I don't know exactly what we've given to Ukraine, but just in what I've read in the newspapers,
$300 billion.
And now let's look at value in kind that still has to be bought. And money is fungible. So if the United States buys a pencil, they're financing that pencil. Think about it. If we send money to Ukraine, if we buy trucks and send them to Ukraine, we're buying those trucks with printed paper.
Oh, credit, right.
Yes.
Right.
Well, that in one word, that's what money is. It's debt. So on the Treasury side, maybe to just have a little tangent, there's an interesting kind of barroom conversation that used to be popular, and it was called the platinum coin option. Congress could pass a law and say, what is our debt right now? I think it's about
$36 trillion, something like that.
37 trillion last time I looked. So Congress could just pass a law tomorrow and says,
$1 trillion coin.
We're going to coin. It doesn't even have to be platinum. It could be anything. We're going to make a wooden coin out of wood. We're going to stamp Donald Trump's face on it, and we're going to declare it legal tender, and it's worth $37 trillion.
Right.
Well, okay. It's legal tender. The Federal Reserve must take it. That's what legal tender means. They must take it as a deposit. So the Fed will credit the government's account with $37 trillion and it will debit liabilities of $37 trillion. And so you probably don't have to be an economist to know what would happen after that. There would be inflation, there'd be quadruple digit inflation in the United States that would lead up to a hyperinflationary situation, and the entire country would melt down. And the only thing that has stopped this from happening to us in the past is the privilege that we have after World War II via Bretton Woods agreements that makes the US dollar basically the world's monetary standard. And ordinarily, I would say BRICS is a stupid idea. It won't work. It's silly. The member countries don't have enough in common for it to all work. But even I didn't anticipate either the stupidity or the negligence that our leaders, especially our financial leaders, have chosen in this thing. It's unbelievable to me.
You're not alone in thinking it wouldn't work. Joe Biden, if you remember, was deriding the leaders of these countries at one point, saying, well, you guys getting together? Sure you are. And eventually they said, okay. And if you notice, though, they decided from their point of view that peace is in their best interest. So China and India have tried to put down their issues to the side. China has worked with Saudi Arabia and Iran to put their issues to the side. So all of these countries that were at each other's throats in some way have started to bring down the hostilities with each other as a way of saying, this is in our best interests. This is in our financial interests. So this is what we're going to do as countries. Personally, I love it because at the very least, they're looking at the world in a less hostile way. And it's less hostile for their own self-interest. Now, if it was a situation where the U.S. imploded and they no longer had this kind of boogeyman that they're positioning against, who knows? But they have argued that they want a multipolar world and that they want to deal with each other as equals. Like they have all of this stuff that's kind of built into it. And the U.S. has taken this stuff as, okay, this is a threat to our hegemonic control of the globe and we need to do something about it. And that's what Trump is responding to. Trump is looking at this in the sense of, okay, that's a problem for us. We need to do something about that. In fact, I was listening to this guy give this fascinating conversation where he was talking about how because of BRICS and because of them trying to use their own currencies when they're dealing with trade and everything else, that we don't even know what is being traded per se. Like he was talking about how I think it was like a grain shipment that China was getting from like the US or somewhere. They canceled the shipment and they was like, okay, they clearly got it from somewhere, but we have no clarity on where they got it from because they're using this kind of alternate system now that we don't have access to and we're completely unaware, meaning we're in the black. They clearly got massive amounts of grain from somewhere. And it was like, maybe they got it from Brazil, maybe they got it from some other country. But the reality of it is that is going to get more, meaning there's going to be more and more of that being done where the dollar is left out in the cold. I was fascinated by that conversation because it's kind of what Trump is pointing at. It's like, all right, if they're not going to use the dollar, then who is? And as you pointed out, 70% of the dollar is outside of the country. Okay, well, what happens to the US economy and everything else if indeed that becomes a norm where they're trading in their own currencies and they decide to just not use that 70% of the dollars? I would imagine it has to come back here, which we don't have the capability of disposing of, not that much money. I mean,
well, that's what I mean by the nuclear nuclear comparison, because the nightmare scenario is this doesn't happen by accident or even evolution. The BRICS countries get in a smoke-filled room and they plan a strategy to have the maximum impact on the United States. So just like nuclear war, no two rational countries want to fight a nuclear war.
No, of course not.
Maybe rational is the wrong word, because rational does sane, even crazy people can be rational. Let's call it no sane people, no sane leaders want to say, you know what? I'm feeling good this morning. Let's go have nuclear war with Russia.
Right.
I don't you have to be so neocon in your thinking that you've lost the ability to even gauge reality. But but that's the nightmare scenario. So it isn't that they stop using the dollar in exchange. They dump the dollar. They're not, think about it. Dollars, if you're not going to spend them, are just pieces of paper. Or
Wait, what do you mean by dump?
Or in the case
Explain
of, or in modern times, they're just digital currencies, right? Because most money is not even in fiat paper.
Things on the keyboard. Yeah.
Right. And so they're not going to hold them because they know a priori that the price of the dollar is going to fall. They're going to dump those dollars even before they announce their new BRICS currency, and you can use this instead. So it would be sort of a preemptive first strike from a monetary warfare perspective. And we're making ourselves vulnerable by the stupidity of how we're managing our monetary policy. We've tried to use it on the war on drugs. It's failed. We're trying to use it on the war I'm going to call it what it is. It's a silent war on Russia. It's not an actual war yet, but it's, for all practical purposes, we're waging war against Russia.
Right.
And then when you look at all of these things, Latin America, well, drugs. Well, the reason that they even supply the drugs is there's this giant sucking sound of demand from Americans who want their cocaine, they want their fentanyl, they want this, they want that. And yet we blame them. And I think you said something earlier that makes a lot of sense to me. Whether you're a person or a country, most people can deal with you if you don't act so smug that you believe you're superior to them in every way. Yes. You and I can't be friends if one of us just thinks the other one is down here and then the other one's up here. We cannot be friends. That's an
you in that situation, right? Where you're like, I'm indispensable and you're something else. How does that work? Who accepts that premise, right?
Well, I think the neocons do. I think, there's a difference between being proud of your country, for feeling fortunate to have been born in a place where there's general freedom, blah, 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 blah. There's a difference in that to believing every cultural difference in the world, every deviation from American culture is somehow evil. Yeah. And, I've traveled a lot and I've seen that stereotypical, dumbass American that, oh, these people drive on the wrong side of the road. Well, it's not the wrong side of the road. It's a different side of the road.
Right.
And that attitude, just kind of at the street level, when it migrates up into this neocon mindset, it's the entire world needs to value exactly what we value. And if they value it in any different way, then they're inferior. And if you could just become Americans, you'd be so happy. And a lot of people in the world look up to America, but they don't want to necessarily be us. They want to pick and choose pieces that they like and pieces that they don't. Right. A great example is Indonesia. They don't have religious freedom there and they don't want it. If you say something heretical about Jesus Christ, you're going to get arrested there. Same way with Muhammad, peace be with both of them.
Yeah.
Seriously, and you can't have a reserve currency if you do everything you can to toxify it, because these countries don't want BRICS. The BRICS countries don't want this. This is a little bit of game theory where they're saber rattling and they're like, okay, if you keep going down this route, you're leaving us no choice but to dump the US dollar. And anyone that studies this stuff knows if it was a concerted, organized policy that worked, it would devastate the United States. But here's the problem. It would devastate them too.
Well, I kind of disagree with that. It's not that I don't think they
would, because we are still the largest demanders of goods and services in the world.
No, I agree with that part. It's the part that they don't want BRICS. I think they want some edifice. I don't think they want this notion of having to pick and choose. Like, I don't think they want to have to, it's either the US or BRICS. I think they want to be able to just deal with trade for everybody.
Well, that's not going to happen because there's always going to be a monetary standard. Back in the 19th century, it was pound sterling and then literally physical gold. I mean, there is an argument. There is some substance to the theory of hegemonic stability. You're in an anarchy of nations. There is no, there is no federation of planets. There is no Earth dome. There is no Earth government. And so, in an anarchy of nations, one nation is the 800-pound gorilla that leads. Well, my problem, and what makes BRICS now a feasible thing instead of a silly, let's go get high and talk monetary theory type thing, something like that. What makes it, what has made it plausible now is our own actions. We have, from a foreign investor's perspective, we have toxified the US dollar. And that didn't used to be that way. Even in the height of the Cold War, we never froze Russian assets. Cuban Missile Crisis, we did not freeze Russian assets. When they invaded Afghanistan, we did not freeze Russian assets. We did not do that because everybody understood that we had a responsibility, which comes with the privilege
Mark, last question. What changed?
Of all this?
I guess last question. What changed? Like, meaning, how did they go from, okay, we have a responsibility. We want to keep the dollar lucid and fluid. We want people to use it. We don't want to use it as a weapon because if we use it as a weapon, people are going to try to mitigate the fact that we're using it as a weapon. Two, we can totally use the dollar as a weapon. We can totally steal money from Russia. We can totally steal gold from Venezuela. What was the thinking in that switch where they said to themselves, this is a great idea? There'd be no consequences from us.
I think I can tell you, I think I can give you a date. August 1st, 1972. It's when Nixon took us off the international
gold standard.
That allowed us, because you got to remember, every nation in the world, including China, pegged their currency to the US dollar. And so when we started inflationary spending for two reasons, the Vietnam War, because they knew the Americans wouldn't go for it if Johnson would have went on TV and said, my fellow Americans, we need to do this and we're going to raise taxes so we can afford it. That war of popularity would have just plummeted, right?
But they should do that.
Same as Iraq. I mean, this is why we don't declare war anymore. We have these little things. And so because they're not really fighting a war, they're using monetary tricks and things like that. But to ask me when it began, I mean, I think that would be a good date.
Well, there's a consciousness change somewhere in the political leadership.
Another place where, I mean, and starting August 1st, 1972, what you find is just a natural evolution. Maybe we could call it the age of the neocon. Yeah. And, I used to associate neocons with Republicans, and I think that was a mistake of mine. It might have even been a mistake then, because Hillary Clinton's not young. Hillary Clinton's more neocon than the neocons. I mean,
and Lyndon Baines Johnson took us into Vietnam.
Exactly.
If you look at Obama overthrew the government of Ukraine, like they do it for different reasons, according to them, right? Humanitarian bombs.
Oh, of course. We're dropping bombs on Vietnam because it's humanitarian.
Yeah.
Forget that South Vietnam was one of the most corrupt governments. To me, matter of fact, history repeats itself. South Vietnam, from a corruption perspective, is Ukraine today. They're just corrupt.
Mark, man, I always appreciate you, man. I like that. Fascinating. I guess lesson on monetary policy and what to expect on this stuff. Because you're right. Like, we are the reserve currency, and we did start messing around with it, thinking to ourselves, I think at some point we got into the mindset of that, everything is like we're little Fukuyamas, that this is the end of history.
Yes, exactly.
The Soviet Union has been beaten. We're chest stomping. We feel great about ourselves. So we believe we can do anything. It's like when Joe Biden said, well, we're America. We can do whatever we want. And it's like, no, and I'll end it on this. I remember what I used to be a monster at chess. Oh, I used to be a monster. I third best in the state of Virginia in regards to winning the tournament. Wow. In Blitz, I used to play up to the level of a master, if not stronger. I was a monster. And then I stopped playing. And you still think to yourself, well, I'm still that monster. I'm still that guy, right? I
Right.
still can go in and just crush somebody.
Yes.
I go to a tournament, I win the first game, like, yeah, I knew I was still that monster. I get in the second game, third game, fourth game, and lose every last game. And you're sitting there with your wife at the time, like, oh, this is humiliating. Like, this is embarrassing. But what you realize is what I don't think the US has come to realize is that you became a monster because you were studying, you were playing constantly, you were reading books, you were in that life and you were doing that stuff constantly. You were doing the lessons, the studies that got you to be that person. It wasn't magic. It wasn't like God just endowed you with this capability. You had to work for it. The moment that you stop working for it, that ability goes away. And it's like you get to the 80s, the 90s, missing the things that got you to be the country that you were. I think it's that on some level where they think that the world is still the 1980s, the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, where Bush can go into Iraq because there's no other country that could ever say it. These days, you have China, you have Russia. These are heavy military powers at this point. The stuff that China is doing economically, like building cities, building roads, they're building that stuff in all parts of the world. It's different. It's not the same world. And it doesn't seem like we have fully accommodated the fact that the world has changed.
Well,
I could be wrong.
And our level of hubris has increased. What you're not doing, to use your chess analogy, what you're not doing right now is you're not going up to a grandmaster who's the chess man or woman right now and talking a bunch of smack.
Right.
That's what the U.S. does way too often, in my opinion. We talk too much smack. Now, do I think the Trump administration is the Messiah and everything's going to be perfect and we live in a land of milk and honey afterwards? No, but I do think from just the winds, the political winds of what's going on, I do think it was a pivotal moment in U.S. history, because I do believe at least the ideology of a lot of this is going to fizzle away. Mm-hmm. And I really hope so, because I would like us to get back to the monetary policy we had up till maybe Eisenhower or something like that.
Yeah.
You can't be the reserve currency and then print yourself into oblivion, because the nations that depend on that currency and the companies that depend on that currency. I mean, we have entire derivative markets now that are designed to hedge against international foreign exchange risk. So Chase will sell options basically on the U.S. dollar, and so let's say, so let's say you and I have let's say you're in the Eurozone, and then we have a contract, and we one way to hedge it is to make sure the contract is denominated in your own local currency. But sometimes you don't get the chance to do that. If you're Airbus and you want to sell to American Airlines, maybe their lawyers get in the room and they start arguing, and then they negotiate, and you agree to make that contract denominated in dollars, and that puts Airbus at risk, because if the dollar depreciates, Airbus could make no money on.
I see. They lose money. That's right.
Yes, exactly. And so there's an entire, in fact, physicists and stuff often don't go into physicists. They go into Wall Street and they go into the pricing and the production of these derivative instruments. It's highly mathematical. It's highly probabilistic, and it's a way to hedge, and it's just insurance. So Airbus might say, you know what, we were going to make $1 billion of profit on this. We're going to spend $50 million, and we're going to buy some insurance. And then even if the dollar tanks, at least we'll get the money that was due to us, as stated in the contract.
Yeah. Wow. Mark Frost, professor, economist, Schumpeterian, recovering libertarian, and easily good friend of the show. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Oh, man. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.